well, thank you and welcome to our end of life Magento Nexus webinar about Magento 1. Not to sound very ominous, but Magento 1 end of life webinar. I'm here with, we have these slides backwards. I'm here with Miguel Barpada and Madeline Anderson, who's our wonderful host today. Madeline?
Yeah, so we can just start up with some introductions. So like Brent said, we have Miguel from the Nexus team. Miguel has been in the Magento world forever. He's kind of the figurehead, I would say. He is an OSS maintainer. He's been a Magento master for 4 years in a row. And he's on the Magento Association Content Committee. And he's spoken at numerous events. So he's a great asset to have on this webinar. And then Brent knows a little bit less about Magento than Miguel, I guess, although he is a 5 times Magento master. He's a Magento solutions specialist and a Magento U trainer, and Brent is from the Wagento team. In this webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your little webinar screen, and when we get to Q&A, I will read out the questions for everybody. And if you have any questions, just if you can use the chat to talk to just the panelists or whatever. So yeah, that is it for me, and I will turn my video off until Q&A.
All right, so our agenda today, we are going to go over just about what we should be doing, what you should be thinking about end of life on Magento 1. Taking no action really isn't an option. You should have a plan at least. We're going to talk about technical debt in your M1 store. This is a subject I'm very interested in, and we're hoping to get a good discussion around that. We are going to talk about the migration from Magento 1 to Magento 2, what that means, how Wagento can help, how Nexus can help in that process. Just on that same thing, how we as an agency or as a hosting provider, how can we help merchants? And maybe we'll just go over a couple of questions that merchants should be asking your agency or your hosting provider. Miguel is going to deep dive into patches and PCI compliance. And I'm super interested in seeing all the different patches that he's putting on his backpack from all his travels around the world. I'm sure that's what he means by patches. And I'm also going to promise not to tell any more jokes today, which I may break. And then novelty versus experience is just around the fact that both Miguel and I have at least 23 years combined experience, 24 years combined experience on Magento, and that some of this experience helps you as a merchant to move through this migration from Magento 1 to Magento 2. And then finally, we're going to do a little bit of QA. So again, as Madeline said, there's a QA box that you can ask specific questions, and we will try to answer those as we get towards the end. If there are simpler questions or they are very relevant, Madeline will interrupt us and say, so-and-so had a question about deployments or how the infrastructure works or something that's relative to the topic. Otherwise, we'll leave questions to the end. And there is a chat box. But we do find that as more people chat, that a lot of those items do get lost. So we encourage you to use the Q&A box. All right, I have droned on along enough. Why don't we get started? Miguel, how are you doing today? How is Argentina? And as I mentioned in our pre-talk, you have already done a great barbecue this morning, and I'm super jealous, and I can hear your dog.
Well, it's like everywhere else, Argentina is in a really weird situation these days. But I get to work, and that makes me really happy. So I don't know. I don't know what's the situation that stays this day, but it's, I don't know. I want to talk about something else instead of talking about COVID-19 and that kind of stuff all day long. So we got to talk about Magento 1, which the end of life is approaching really fast. In 9 days, we're going to have people asking me, hey, what happened with Magento 1 end of life? And I'm going to be like, nothing actually happened. There are a bunch of stuff that you have to do, but in reality, it's not like your payment provider is going to stop processing orders or your site is going to be offline on July 1st. So I don't want to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I want to help people on Magento 1 so they have enough time to migrate someplace else, because I'm not one of those guys saying, yeah, you can stay on Magento 1 forever. That's a really great idea. I'm actually the opposite. I'm going to be like, yeah, I don't like Magento 1 because it's 10 years old. And despite the fact you are still processing orders, it's old technology. And at some point, you need to consider a migration. That can be Magento 2, that can be WooCommerce, that can be anything but Shopify. Don't go to Shopify, you don't want that. Now, seriously, there's a ton of things people need to really understand about the Magento 1 end of life. And to be honest, most of the campaigns I've been seeing revolve around trying to scare people away from Magento 1. And that's not what I want to do. That's not what Magento wants to do, if you ask me. We're actually trying to help people understand why it's dangerous, why it's a terrible idea to stay on Magento 1 forever. And then when they are ready, help them migrate someplace else. If it's Magento 2, well, that's pretty great. But if it's not, I'm going to still help you and try to guide you, you know? How's this for you, Brent? How's Wagento handling all these Magento 1 stores that are not yet ready to migrate?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the point that your store is not going to stop. And the biggest thing out there that people or that I think that companies are trying to scare Magento 1 users with is around the PCI compliance. I know we're going to get into that later, but the fact of the matter is, if you custom wrote your store in any old language, you are still going to have to be PCI compliant no matter what that's on. So getting that test done by a third party is really what the key is in this end of life world. Your store will continue to work. Your store will continue to process transactions, but you will need to be PCI compliant to continue to be compliant with your payment providers. And that, I think, is really the key. And I think you also hit on a really good point on this technology that Magento 1 is built on is getting older. And as we look forward, there are going to be features and new things that come that you will want to utilize. And Magento 2 offers those things. And this is an opportunity to now start planning. So when we say in action, an action would simply be, my plan is to get to Magento 2 at this point. How can we get there? And I think the way we can work best with you as a merchant would be to work with you on that plan. And that plan would include Nexus as a hosting provider to help in the infrastructure and all those other things that are around your migration. And Magento can certainly help in your code move.
Yeah, let me add something real quick about inaction is not an option. You don't have to take like the biggest decision of your life and be like, yeah, I'm moving to Magento 2 tomorrow. Just like you said, you have to take action. And that's basically, that can be either like protecting your site with something like Safe Harbor, trying to start the migration, or like the process of a re-platform from Magento 1 to Magento 2, or simply try to keep your store up to date with PHP 7.4 and applying those security patches. This doesn't, like, July 1 doesn't mean you have to move off Magento 1. And that's something I want to say extremely clear, because people talk about PCI, people talk about security, but now we realize that most of these Magento 1 merchants, they are not these huge technological companies we see using Magento 2. These are a bunch of people selling online, maybe 10, 20, maybe 100 SKUs that don't really care about the ecosystem, you know? like there's a bunch of people like me or you who actually love this ecosystem, but there's a really big amount of merchants or like store owners who doesn't really care about like the latest JavaScript framework or like the latest PHP or Magento 2 version. They just want to sell online and make an end, you know, just sell a bunch of SKUs, pay some salaries, like make some money, and that's pretty much it. So it's like, none of us like Magento 1, but it's a thing, and that's the reality. There's no way to hide that reality from like the general public here. And people don't get to understand that. People really, really believe everybody should move to Magento 2 because it's superior. But there are merchants that they just don't have the resources. They don't have like the motivation. And that's something we need to consider, because if we don't help those people, they're just going to move someplace else and they are going to leave the ecosystem. And nobody wants that, you know?
Yeah, and I think just talking about how we can help, we do have a slide that's gonna pertain exactly to talking with the merchant talking with the hosting provider, and talking with your agency on what is the best course of action to get you to move to Magento 2. And I know that we've worked with even smaller merchants who are on Magento 1. And as we move to our next topic, is that those merchants, if you've been on Magento 1 for the last 12 years, you've incurred a lot of technical debt. And what we mean by technical debt is that you've been able to create your awesome store over the last 12 years. And even if you've only spent, say, $50,000 a year or $10,000 a year, if it's 10 years, $10,000 a year times 10 is $100,000. So we need to be aware of that technical debt and look at, in your migration plan, what is it that if you don't, how can we recreate what you've done over the last 10 years in the next iteration of your new store? And this is a reality on whatever you decide to migrate to. Miguel, what is your take on this?
So a lot of people ask me, what do you mean by technical debt? For me, technical debt is basically the implied cost of implementing a simpler solution instead of going like the better route. And for me, for Magento 1, this means staying on Magento 1 forever, instead of actually trying to migrate someplace else. Or even simpler, stay on Magento on PHP 7.0 instead of using PHP 7.4. And that's a form of technical debt. So I keep seeing people that don't really want to migrate, but then when you ask them, what are you going to do at the end of the year where PHP 7.2 becomes end of life too? And they are like, I have no idea. I didn't even know that. So there are a ton of things that can be called technical debt. But for me, this means actually taking the easier route instead of doing like what you need to do at the moment you need to do it. You know, I get to see this a lot because I'm a hosting company, and people is like, nah, I can keep using PHP 5.6, and I'm gonna be like, how about no? How about you don't do that? Because they have like a ton of security issues. They have like this really bad performance, but people is like, it works for me. So what can I say to this kind of people? It's a really hard discussion because they don't understand what the benefits are. I'm not good enough to like convince them, but I still know they need to be not convinced, but maybe help, because they don't realize how dangerous it is to actually run an outdated software. And the majority of hacks we see, they are not because, I don't know, you have a bug in the core code. It's basically because you're using old unsupported versions of something, and that can be a module, that can be like a vendor provided patch, that can be anything. But most of the hacks we see, they come from a like outdated code. And that's one of the things people need to understand when it comes to Magento security.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point there about the fact that if you just leave it and do nothing, then eventually something is going to happen. And if you take it like your car, if you drive your car for 100,000 miles without ever changing the oil, your technical debt is a new engine, and you will have to take action. Now, of course, on the web it's different. You don't have to change your oil, but you do have to attend to. You do want to make sure you're keeping up with whatever the new technology is out there. So, for example, it was a struggle for my dad to get off of AOL and a 28.8 modem. And then when he suddenly went to broadband, the internet was much faster, and he was very impressed. So if he would have stayed, if you stay with your provider on a old dial-up modem, you are going to miss out on many of the new features that are out there. So thinking of it in those terms gives you an idea of why you should be moving forward, and how that, let's call it technical debt, only makes it more difficult to move forward.
Yeah, one more thing I want to add here is that there are many reasons to use the latest technical stack, and it's not just vanity. There's a bunch of people who tell me, yeah, I don't want to use the latest JavaScript framework. I don't need that. And I'm going to be like, okay, that's fine. But the latest version of any software is the version that has the less bugs, because people actually fix them and release new versions with improvements, new features, bug fixing, that kind of stuff. So it's not just vanity here. It's not like you want to be the cool kid and use the latest JavaScript framework. This is about the security of your sites. And given that we process credit card payments, this is actually really important. I like to tell people that I wouldn't like my mom to go into an online store and buy something, so her credit card gets hacked. That's going to be a terrible experience for me, for her, for the store owner. That's going to be really problematic. So I don't know. I would say people need to understand we are processing payments here. It's not like we are just a bunch of guys running non-transactional websites. That's not the case. We process orders. Orders have credit cards. That's somebody else's money. So this has the potential to be extremely messy. So it's going to be problematic at some point. And well, the fines, if you get breached, you're going to have this big ass fine, and that's going to cost you a lot of money. So the more you can prevent here, it's going to be way better for you in the future, because you will be able to concentrate yourself in moving away from Magento 1 instead of where do I make money to pay this huge fine? These are the times where you still have a couple of days to be proactive in the security of your site, and not reactive. Hey, we find something bad happened. What do I do now? That's a terrible response when it comes to security. What we are trying to do here is try to prevent something terrible from happening, and it doesn't play that good with technical debt, because you don't know where the breaches can come from, but certainly they will come from outdated code, if you ask me. That's what I see the most at Nexus.
Yeah, I mean, you've brought up a couple of really good points. First, your technical debt is security, and security of your web store, and that's probably the most important part. So if you have a physical store, most people with a physical store have an alarm, or at least they have a lock on their front door. So you would not leave any of those things open. And then the second thing would be the performance of your store. And by keeping up with the latest, doesn't mean anything other than the latest is going to have both the best performance and the best security. So in any of those terms, it makes perfect sense to keep moving forward with the latest version of Magento. And I think one of those other small things that gets lost in the discussion is Magento 2.0 is also end of life. Any version of Magento, any version of software, anything, your browser, your operating system on your current computer, you want to move forward and continue to get whatever that latest release is Miguel, I know you're probably still using Windows XP, but I've moved on to Vista. So I think that any of us want to make sure that we're using a updated version of that software to get the best performance and the best security out of it.
The Magento 2.0 example is great because I told that to like many of our customers, but they told me like something like, but PayPal didn't send anything. Like, why isn't Visa talking about this? And I'm like, well, there are certain interests in certain companies that really want you to see moving outside Magento 1 to Magento 2. So it's release cycles for software are complex, but they are always written down. So it's way easier to actually understand this by yourself instead of actually relying on these weird communications PayPal, Visa, or any kind of payment providers are sending out, because they have their own interests. But you as a merchant, you as a store owner, you have your own interests too. So if you get an email from your payment provider asking you to move away from Magento 1, you can be like, how about if I don't do that? What happens if I don't do that? Are you gonna stop processing my payments? And like I told many times in many webinars, it's a really good time to go out and shop for payment providers. There are a ton of companies willing to take your payments, willing to take your money and that good commission they take. So if you're working with a provider that doesn't want to take the risk or doesn't want to take the responsibility to run a Magento 1 store, you can just move and go to next door and be like, hey, will you take my money? Would you take my payment? And a lot of companies are going to be like, yes, absolutely. And that's something we haven't really said before, but we're actually working with a really big player out there. We are going to announce something really soon, but it's going to be big because people was like, no, I'm not doing this. But then they backpedaled a little bit and said something like, well, if you don't have enough time or if you are still trying to figure how to work things out, you can use this and that. And if you go to that PayPal page right now, you're going to be seeing some resources that weren't there first. So it's not like everything is going to stop. It's not like the end of the world. But there are a bunch of things you actually need to take care of. We're going to talk about that in the PCI slide. But there are a ton of options out there. So I really need people to understand this is no time to be scared, but it's a really good time to actually do something,
Yeah, so move it like you groove it. And I know that you came up with this slide after doing the tango in your last webinar, which is really good, by the way. If you haven't seen Miguel dance a tango, you should watch it. I think he has a YouTube channel on tango.
I don't.
All right. Anyways, so moving from Magento 1 to Magento 2, Miguel, give us your 10,000, your 3,300 meter view of this.
This is not a migration by a replatforming. That's something everybody needs to understand. There might be a bunch of stuff you can take away from your Magento 1 store, but that's mostly data, like customer data, order data, product data. But the rest, the customizations, the integrations you have, most of them will have to be recoded for Magento 2. It might be easier because both are PHP, but what I usually say is that the only thing Magento 1 and 2 share is the name. So it's kind of, I know there are a bunch of companies telling you, yeah, I can do this migration in 1, 2, 10 days. I don't think that's a great idea. And I do think programs like the express builds you have with Wagento are great because it doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't take like a ton of money, but you still get things done right by a really good agency, like a really good system integrator like Wagento, and you don't risk yourself by putting yourself out there and working with these really cheap companies doing stuff like really fast without really checking the quality of their code, the quality of like their builds. So I would say you need to treat this as a replatforming, but there are a couple of, like a handful of resources you still can use, like Nexus, like Wagento. We still do Magento 2. Wagento also do Magento 2, but besides that, it's not like a really simple migration to a different Magento version. That's not the case. And I have seen companies promoting that, and I get really mad because that's just misleading, you know?
Yeah, I agree that I think the role of both Nexus and Wagento is to make the migration as easy as possible for the merchant. So as you said, it is complicated, and as you dig into it, it's not extremely easy. But as we are going to go into our next slide, just having that communication channel and having your expectations, having those expectations come to the surface with your agency or with your hosting provider is the key to success. And as we talked about in taking action, that first part of that action is to create a plan for your migration. So starting with your data migration, there is a great data migration tool that Magento has created that we use. And if you're interested, I have a Adobe Summit presentation on that. And I also have 12 Magento U episodes on migrating from Magento 1 to Magento 2 that kind of walk you through the basics of that migration. And you can, I think during this migration process, this is the time that you can rethink and re-envision your store. We do have customers that are still coming to us that are on Magento 1 and their store is not responsive. So in this migration, that responsiveness is going to come with your Magento 2 store. And the reality of your situation is that your store, if it is 12 years old or 10 years old, you probably need a new look or at least a fresh update to your website. And in that update, you are going to have to redo your theme. When you move to Magento 2, you will have to redo your theme. This is the opportunity to redo those items that you need to do. And Magento 2 also gives you the ability to do progressive web apps. So you can choose to use the Magento theme or a Magento theme from a vendor, but you can also build a progressive web app or PWA that I know Nexus supports as well. So there are many options available to you while you are migrating from Magento 1 to Magento 2. And I just want to reiterate, this is the time to think about and re-envision your store. And I would say even simplify your store as you move forward. And going back to that slide about technical debt, some of that technical debt could be the 30 or 40 modules that you've had installed over the last 10 years and you're only using 3 of them. And by the way, 2 of those modules are already covered in Magento 2. So this is a time to think about what you're doing. Miguel, what is, from a hosting side, how do you see the process happening?
We only get to see like the last part of the process. Like when everything's ready, people is gonna call me and be like, yeah, I want to move my site to Nexus. So it's not like we get to see how people is actually coding this. We do get to work with some of our partners on that process, but it's mostly a black box for us. And the bad thing about that is when you come to Nexus and you tell me, yeah, the site doesn't work here, I'm gonna be like, why didn't you try this before the day you were supposed to launch? Why didn't you try to develop your site on top of the servers you're going to be using for production? You know, so I would like to see more people working closely with hosting providers or like cloud providers, because it doesn't have to be like the last action you do. It has to be something you try before you go live. It has to be something you actually understand. And I'm going to say something really weird, because I don't really understand why people don't seem to get this. Most of the Magento Cloud out there are managed hosting. So if you come to me and tell me I need sudo for this, I need elevated permission for that, that's going to be like, no. But then I'm going to tell you why are you even buying our services? That's where I provide value in managing your hosting, in managing your infrastructure. I'm managing that part, so you don't have to hire an extremely expensive team of system administrators like sysadmins, sysocs. That's where I provide value. So I would say I would like to see more and more companies working closely with cloud providers, because it's going to be easier for everybody. You know, it's going to be way easier for you to try your store before the date you have to go live, basically to avoid all kind of issues. So it's a really complicated process because there's not a lot of like understanding, and I've seen companies doing a really bad job when it comes to like moving from Magento 1 to Magento 2, or like starting new Magento 2 projects. So it's going to be, it's a really complicated situation, if you ask me. And I would like to see that work, you know, but it's not really up to me. I'm just a little tiny part at the end of the build operation, and I don't like that. I don't like to be like the main guy there, where you ask me, hey, how is this supposed to work? How is Varnish integrating? How do you do PHP? How can we use Redis? That kind of stuff. So I would like to be a part of that process, but it's not that common in the agency world. So it's the way it is.
Yeah, and I think this is a perfect segue into the next topic about how we're communicating as an agency. And specifically, I think that Nexus really shines in when you go from Magento 1 to Magento 2, one of the most important things that you can do, and one of the easiest things you can do, is your go live environment would be ready to go live at the point of going live. And what do I mean by that? You're developing a new platform, or you're developing your Magento store. You can have that store ready to go live by simply switching over to the new version at the time you'd want to switch over. Before you do that, that store is still available with a testing URL that you can load test, that you can do all kinds of things to before you go live. And talking to your hosting provider is the most important thing, so they know what you're going to be doing when you go live. So for example, if you are planning on going live at midnight on a Tuesday, Magento 2, you should tell your hosting provider a day in advance, or even more, that here's our plan to go live. Please be ready for us to do this. And if we need somebody, we're going to call, and we would like to talk to Miguel at midnight on Tuesday.
Yeah, don't call me at midnight. That's going to be problematic. But it's, yeah, no, just don't do that. Like, we do have 24/7 support, but just don't call me directly, because I'm going to be sleeping, or I'm going to be watching TV, and I'm not going to pick the phone. So, but yeah, there are a bunch of stuff we can do as a hosting provider, but it all revolves around you actually telling me your plans. If you come to me and be like, yeah, your server doesn't work, I'm going to have to do the investigation. I will have to do like the research to actually understand why your server is not working as you think it should work. I need to understand how you build this thing. I need to understand how you deploy this thing to our servers. So there are a ton of things we can do, but it's going to be mostly around the application. You know, the environments we use are optimized for Magento, so that's usually not the problem. The biggest problems we see are code related, but nobody wants to hear a server error is basically your code doing nasty stuff. When people see, okay, this is a 500 error, that means internal server error. You see, server. Yeah, that's not what that means, you know? So I would say people need to understand the managed part of managed hosting more, because that's where we provide value, and that's where we can help. If you're having like PHP issues and you need more workers, you don't add more RAM to like that server. You add more PHP FPM processes. You know, if you are having issues with like the amount of files you have in your server, you can use Redis for sessions and for like the cache. And that's going to help you. But I need to understand why you are using 5 for sessions in the first place, because you might have a special requirements and you might need that. And me offering you Redis is gonna break your stuff. So it's all about communication. The more you communicate with me, the more I get to understand your site, the better for everybody, because I will spend less time doing research and more time fixing your site, you know? And I think the same goes for you, Brent, right? If people tell you, yeah, I want this, and you have to figure the entire thing by yourself, it's gonna be like way more complicated than someone coming with a full ass project with like a really clear specification, right?
Yeah, and I just want to be clear that I was joking about calling Miguel at midnight. You can call him at 1 a.m., but not midnight. No, but Nexus is there because they have a whole team of people that work 24 hours a day. So they are there to help you no matter what time of the day it is. And it may not be Miguel helping you on your Magento 2 project. It may be one of their other engineers that helps you. But the point is that in advance of you going live as a merchant, you want to be communicating with Nexus to tell Nexus that on Tuesday at midnight, we are going to do our M1 to M2 switchover, and we would like you to be aware of that. So if you do see this spike happening, or if you do see something happening that you understand what we need for help. But that communication should happen well in advance, so that you could run load against your new go live site to know what's going to happen when a lot of people hit it. And I would even say that another good thing would be to say, make your go live site as a beta and let friends and family start using it in advance. And that also gives you more of an opportunity to know when you do go live with your new Magento 2 site, that it is going to perform the way you want to. So again, working with Nexus to make sure that the new site is ready to go live on the date you wanted to go live, and then doing some load testing against that new site to know that this load is going to work the way we would like it to work, and then communicating with Nexus to tell them the potential load you will have on that site, if it's going to be more from the old site or if it's going to be about the same. They will be able to help you to make sure that you have the right environment to work with the version of Magento that you have, and that when you do that switch over, that your new site is ready and there's no surprises. One of the biggest things that I see is when you haven't told anybody your DNS information, and then all of a sudden, you know, we're going to go live, and then somebody said, okay, well, what is my DNS login, or where is the DNS login, or how do I change this? There's just lots of little things that an agency would ask you and a hosting provider would ask you, and then making this plan at the beginning so we can all work toward the same goal is the most important thing that we can do to make your launch successful. And in that is just communication with everybody. We work with Nexus as a partner, and we work with you as a merchant as the partner. And we never do finger pointing. We're always working for that common goal of getting your site live.
Yeah, talk for you. I'm gonna always put my fingers at you. It's your problem now. No, just kidding. But it's always DNS. So if you're having issues, go check DNS, because it's always DNS. One more thing about this. You actually mentioned one of our features, which is, well, staging or like development sites. That's a great feature, because I'm tired. I'm really tired about this, because people keep trying stuff in their production sites and people keep breaking their sites. And then they call me and they'll be like, my site is not working. I haven't changed anything. And then I'll be like, you understand I get to see like the full history of your server, right? You don't lie to me, because I get to see what you did. And most of the times, at least 85% of the times where a site is down, it's about an update a customer did, a store owner did from the admin, or like a new module they install. So it's just do that kind of stuff in your development side, in your staging environment, instead of actually doing that in your live side. You know, it's a terrible practice. A lot of people still do, and I'm trying to correct that as much as I can. But it's not been, it hasn't been really easy, because that's an ingrained thing people do. So it's a terrible thing to do, and people keep doing it. So it's the way it is.
Yeah, I mean that's a good segue point into how we work with patches, and how those patches are going to be how those patches keep you PCI compliant, and how in your staging and your development site that you should be testing all these things before you go live. Magento has been guilty in giving us new patches and upgrades or versions that will, in some cases, break parts of your site. So testing that patch is very important. And I would always say never test anything new on your live site. Test it on your staging site. And Nexus is perfectly set up to give you multiple environments to make sure that you're not testing your patch on your live site.
I want to say something about PCI here real quick. PCI is like, it's a great guideline. People really need to understand that, because I keep seeing merchants and like regular people on the internet saying, yeah, PCI sucks, PCI is terrible, PCI is outdated. And I kind of agree with all of that, but it's still the best we have. And people need to understand that PCI is basically what's keeping the internet sane. It's what keeping the internet safe at some point. Because even though it's like old and doesn't take open source software into consideration in some of their points, I really like one of the takes Ben from Sonasi had. And he basically said, this is the best we have. And people need to understand that. And the more you say PCI doesn't work or PCI is not important, people is going to read that as security is not important. The safety of the data we transmit is not important. And that's terrible. And that can't be like, it's actually a terrible lie people keep telling to themselves to avoid complying to like really basic stuff. The second thing I want to say about PCI is that you don't have to trust people talking to you about PCI, like trying to explain PCI to you. Just go and read the specs. PCI is kind of technical, but it's also really easy to read if you have the time. And again, most of the campaigns I've seen about PCI and Magento and like the patches, those campaigns are for people who haven't done a single PCI audit in their entire life. So it's pretty misleading, if you ask me. We've done tons of PCI assessments. All of our infrastructure at Nexus is PCI compliant. We help customers pass their own PCI assessments with the attestation of compliance, which actually helps. So it's not like you need to trust me because I've read the PCI specs once. You need to trust me because Nexus has been PCI compliant for the last decade, you know? And that's one of the things I usually say when we talk about novelty versus experience. There might be a tons of companies out there who actually know what they're doing, but they don't have like the real experience. I can tell you what I did 10 years ago. I can tell you the first Magento version was created in one of our servers. I can tell you 6 years ago, I helped Magento with one of those nasty bugs they had, because we got to see the traffic that was coming to our network, and we were able to identify what was happening. So novelty is great, it's sexy, and it sells a lot, but experience, that kind of stuff is the thing that helps you. And about patches, PCI 6.2 says something like, you need to prove you're installing vendor-provided patches in a timely manner. For us and for a lot of people, which includes lawyers, PCI auditors, and payment providers, vendor-provided patches doesn't mean only Magento, the original vendor, can provide patches. That usually, for us, that means I'm gonna explain you this in a second. For us, that means we can be a vendor. Wagento can be a vendor. OpenMesh can be a vendor. As long as you are installing the patches in a timely manner in that time frame PCI stage, which I think is like 30 days, you should be okay. And people is gonna tell me, but what about PayPal? What about Visa? What about those scary messages we got? Again, they have their own interests and you have yours. So we do believe you can still pass PCI assessments with extra security measures, and that's why we created Safe Harbor, which is a new add-on, which revolves around security. We created a web application firewall, malware scans, automatic patching. Those are like compensating security measures, and with that, we believe anybody should be able to pass a PCI assessment. Now, I'm not a QSA. I'm not allowed to actually say that, but I would say you can go check this in any of our landing pages, or you can contact me directly if you want me to point you to more resources. But I do believe a really big part of this campaign to move away from Magento 1 is based on fear. And I don't like that. I'm not that kind of person. You're not going to be seeing me telling you, yeah, you need to migrate now or else the end of the world is here. I really want to help people. And I really think most of the campaigns we keep seeing are for uninformed merchants or store owners who haven't really read the PCI specs by themselves. And that's why I'm telling you, yeah, you go read the specs by yourself because you can actually understand what they say. You don't get to interpret them because that's what QSAs do, but you get to actually understand what people mention when they say, yeah, PCI 6.2, 6.3, and that kind of stuff. And one more thing about this is that Magento 1 is using an OSL version 3 license, which means it's free and open. And all of the resulting code you get out of Magento 1 in the form of patches, new features, modules, should have the same OSL license. So there are companies that are actually trying to sell patches. That's kind of like, I don't really like that, to be honest, because for me, it goes against the open source spirit, but not only against the spirit, it goes against like the license Magento 1 used for the last decade. So there are a bunch of things you need to take into consideration, and the license is one of them, you know?
Yeah, I mean, those are all really good points. I appreciate the safe harbor. Wagento also has a program called No Hassle Updates that ensures that you are in the latest version of Magento. And we would include Magento 1 in that. And we work with a number of other providers to make sure that the site is maintained as it should be. But the bottom line on PCI is that you pass PCI compliance. And so as Miguel earlier said, we would work with you to make sure that all the check boxes are ticked off. We have clients doing PEM testing that would make sure that they've scanned your server scanned your site to make sure that there aren't any security holes, and that if you are in that threshold where you have to have a third party, that third party is going to sign off on your site to say that you are PCI compliant. So this doesn't always just reside on the merchant. It's on the merchant to make sure that you get your PCI compliance done. But whether you're self-assessing or you're having to go to a third-party assessment provider, either way, at the end of the day, when you are compliant, and you have a third party that is signing off on your compliance in PCI. Miguel, I think you also brought up a great point, this novelty versus experience. And I think we both can speak to that on having that experience and how well or how much knowledge that gets accumulated in our collective minds in the Magento community and amongst the people that have been in this for the last 10 plus years on working on Magento, there's always going to be that new vendor that's offering something that seems great, but you can never get past having someone that's been doing this for such a long time. So I know this was your particular, this is one of your passions, is this novelty versus experience. So why don't you give us your overview of this, and then we can move on to Q&A.
Yep. So there are like maybe 5 or 10 companies trying to offer support for Magento 1, and I'm gonna be like, sure, that's great. I really like competitors, but at the end of the day, how many of them have been maintaining or supporting Magento 1 for the last decade? When we started doing Safe Harbor, I was telling my coworkers, this is business as usual for us. It's not like we are starting to maintain outdated Magento 1 versions like this month. I can go right now and point you like 10, 12, maybe 20 sites running Magento 1.6. That's terrible, and nobody wants to see that. But I would say you really want experience when it comes to maintaining legacy software instead of novelty. Novelty sells, novelty is sexy, but experience, that kind of stuff, is what gets you like that's the kind of stuff that might be able to help you when you're having issues. So it's not like you have to trust me for my promises. You can just go and see what I've been doing for the last 5, 10 years and be like, oh, right, these guys, they actually understand what Magento 1 means, because the first Magento 1 was deployed on Nexus, because for the last 10 years, they have been maintaining Magento 1 stores, even without daily versions, even with PHP 5.6, you know? And if you go to like any other companies, you're gonna be seeing people telling you, you're gonna hear people telling you, yeah, PHP 5.6 is terrible. Nobody should be using that. And I'm gonna be like, that's right, I agree. But then I still have people running Magento 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, and they need PHP 5.6. So what are you gonna do? Are you gonna ditch them, or are you gonna backport security issues from higher versions to like the lower versions? That's what I mean when I talk about novelty versus experience. Novelty is gonna be like, yeah, I'm using PHP 7.4. And experience is gonna be like, I'm backporting security issues from 7.4 to 5.6, you know?
Yeah, it's great. I know that we're running low on time now, so why don't we move into the Q&A? And just for future topics, I think a great topic would be around how you launch your Magento 2 store, something like that. But anyways, so let's move into QA now. And Madeline, are there some questions for us?
Yep, we have some questions in the QA box. This first question, how do you see Magepack for M2 for optimizing speed?
I'll take that one. So Magepack is amazing. It's an incredible tool. Everybody should be using these days. It's great and it works. So I would say people should be using that to do a bunch of like front-end optimizations. I'm not the most front-end guy out there, but I'm getting into like the JavaScript world, the PWA world, and I keep seeing more and more tools like Magepack, which are incredible, and they really help with the performance. And it can be as basic as moving like the JavaScript and the blocking JavaScript to the bottom, or like trying to compile something instead of rendering it entirely in the client. But it really works. So I think we all agree.
Yeah, there are lots of tools like Magepack, and we'll leave the link. We'll have some follow-up notes for this on the recording, and we'll put the link to Magepack, because I also agree it's a fantastic tool, and it even works on Magento Cloud, so it can help your performance there.
Great. So next, another question. What are the pros and cons of maintaining your store on M1, I assume, rather than upgrading?
Well, I think I'll do the first part, and Miguel, you can do the second part to this. The pros certainly are that doing nothing is easier than doing something. So I guess that's a con, right? Um, you may, again, going back to technical debt, you may have a lot of things that you have done in your Magento 1 store and you're not ready to do your next version, but I would just encourage you to make a plan to move to Magento 2 as you are keeping your Magento 1 store.
Sorry, you lost me there for a second. My internet went down. I'm back.
We were just talking, Madeline, could you just repeat the question really quick?
Yeah, the question was the pros and cons of maintaining your store rather than upgrading.
Yeah, at some point that's gonna earn you some technical debt, just like Brent said. So there are many cases that maintaining your store is a better alternative than actually upgrading, but you really need to understand the risks that's actually involving. So it's not for everybody. I would recommend that for a handful of cases, but that's gonna be up to like the type of store and the resources you have. I don't want anybody to stop selling online during these days, so I'm gonna help you as much as I can. But you're not gonna be hearing me say something like, "Yeah, you can sell Magento 1 forever." I don't think that's a great response. So it's at some point you need to understand you want to move someplace else because of a ton of reasons, and not just because that's the latest shiny thing.
Yeah, that's kind of like saying floppy disks forever.
Yeah. Like they work and you can store them, but it's a terrible idea.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, we maybe have time for one or two more questions. What are some resources merchants can use if they need more information?
Merge docs. That's a great resource. Not a lot of people know. We have Magento, github.com/Magento/merge docs or something. Well, that's GitHub. I think it's mergedocs.magento.com or something like that. And that's a really interesting user manual for Magento merchants using Magento to sell online. We didn't have that for Magento 1. And that's a great resource. If you need something more technical, I would say go to DevDocs. But that's for developers, you know. But yeah, merge docs are a great tool for merchants. And not a lot of people really know that.
Yeah, I think merge docs is newer and it is open source. So if you have something that you want to add to merge docs, you can add to it. Or if you see a mistake, it's kind of like Wikipedia. You can add or you can update those. You can't do it in real time, but you can certainly put in, hey, I've seen this thing here. I would like this added. It is a complete glossary of how to use Magento. And if it's not there, you can add it. So it's a great resource, and I agree with Miguel that Merge Docs is a great resource for doing that. And I guess from there are less technical questions on Stack Exchange. There's magento.stackexchange.com that as a merchant you can ask questions, and you do get fairly quick answers. And then I think the Magento forums are very well used, and lots of merchants are using the Magento forums as well.
Yep.
Madeline, I think we have one more question. Time for one more?
Okay, let's do one more question. Why should I have an agency help me with my migration?
That's a question for you, Brent.
Well, I think that it is a process, and I think going back to all the knowledge that we've collected as an agency, and helping you to at least create that plan along with our hosting provider is the #1 reason why you should be using an agency. I think you can do the migration on your own, but just like a mechanic knows how to change something quickly, or at least has the knowledge and has the experience of having done that, Going to an agency helps you to create a roadmap and a plan to get you from point A to point B. And there may be some times that you can do something to get your site live sooner by using an agency who has done this before than having to go through the process on your own without any pre-knowledge of what is ahead of you and what should you expect. And it's going to help you get that path and get you live quicker and more efficient. And at the end of the day, you are going to save money.
Yeah, people ask me a lot about, like, why should I be using Nexus instead of building my own thing on AWS? And I'm like, sure, go for it. I'm going to be here waiting for you when you fail. That happens a lot. Like, people is like, yeah, I can do this by myself. And I'm going to be like, sure, you can build this, but can you maintain this? And people is like, all right, it's not just building a server, but you actually have to maintain it. And that's where I provide value. That's where I help. You don't need to hire an entire sysops operation team. And that's the same thing with an agency. You can do your own thing, or you can ask someone who actually understands what's going on. And that's where you have to pay for it, because that's the service. But people don't get to realize that. I've seen people asking me, but if Magento 2 is open source, as in free, why do I have to pay for it? Because time costs money, because knowledge costs money, And we are providing knowledge. We are providing the knowledge we gained for the last decade, for the last, 20 years. And that's what people don't get to understand, don't seem to understand. Knowledge costs money and time costs money,
Yeah, and I think, as all the viewers can hear, that Miguel tells it as it is. So we're not going to, Miguel is going to tell you as it is. And I think that, agency is going to help you know what you need, and finding an agency going to tell you as it is going to give you that best experience and get you live quicker than not doing or trying to do it on your own.
Yep.
All right, Madeline, I think that's all time. We're at the top of the hour already. That went quick.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody. We are going to follow up with this recording, and you'll see social media after. And Miguel, thank you so much. This has been such a great experience. I look forward to hearing it in Spanish, and I hope you speak slower than you normally do in Spanish so I can try to understand it.
Yeah, we'll try that too. We'll see how that goes. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. And yeah, you know where to find us. You can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn. You can find us traveling all around the globe, or you can go to Minnesota and rent store.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll post our contact information on the follow-up as well. So again, thanks a lot, and have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.